Judaism is an unusual, subtle, profoundly humane faith that challenges the conventional wisdom of the ages. Faith is the courage Abraham and Sarah showed when they heard the call of God and left behind all they had known to travel to an unknown destination. Faith led more than 100 generations of our ancestors to continue that journey, knowing all the risks, yet believing that there's no greater privilege than to be part of it. Faith is the voice that says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Faith sustained Jews in the dark days of persecution. It led them never to give up hope that one day they would return to Israel, to Jerusalem, and to freedom. Jews kept faith alive, and faith kept the Jewish people alive. Faith is not certainty. It's the courage to live with uncertainty. It is not knowing all the answers. It's often the strength to live with the questions. It isn't a sense of invulnerability. It's the knowledge that we are utterly vulnerable, but that it's precisely in our vulnerability that we reach out to God, and through this learn to reach out to others, able to understand their fears and doubts. We learn to share, and in sharing discover the road to freedom. It's only because we are not gods that we are able to discover God. God is the personal dimension of existence, the thou beneath the it, the ought beyond the is, the self that speaks to self in moments of total disclosure. Opening ourselves to the universe, we find God reaching out to us. At that moment, we make the life-changing discovery that though we seem utterly insignificant, we are utterly significant, a fragment of God's presence in the world. Eternity preceded us. Infinity will come after us. Yet we know that this day, this moment, this place, this circumstance is full of the light of infinite radiance, whose proof is the mere fact that we are here to experience it. Faith is where God and human beings touch across the abyss of infinity. Emunah means faithfulness, love as loyalty. The closest analogue is marriage, a mutual commitment entered into in love, binding the partners together in fidelity and trust. God chose us, we chose God, and though our relationship has sometimes been tense and troubled, the bond between us is unbreakable. Knowing, we are known. Feeling, we are felt. Acting, we are acted upon. Living, we are lived. And if we make ourselves transparent to existence, then our lives too radiate that divine presence which, celebrating life, gives life to those whose lives we touch. Faith is the space we create for God.
Welcome everybody this evening for our wonderful presentation of 10 Steps to a New You. We are up to step number 7 tonight, and that is none other than the step of faith. And in our studios here tonight, we have an extremely special guest, somebody very close to my heart. It's, when you are a yeshiva student or a rabbi or a student of the Torah of any kind, you always have your different rebbeim. You have your different teachers who taught you along the way, but then you have that select few that you always refer to as Rebbe. And for me, when I say Rebbe with no other defining terms afterwards, it always refers to Rabbi Binyomin Friedman, Shlita of Atlanta, Georgia. Because when I was all of 16 years old, I wandered into his shul, I wandered into his house, and the rest is basically history. In the summer of 1994, I attended a BBYO summer program. Now, this was a very interesting BBYO summer program because one of the unique features of B'nai B'rith Youth is that it's a true pluralistic youth group, meaning that it is non-denominational. It has no relationship with conservative, reform, orthodox, humanists, reconstructionists, nudists, none of it. So what that means is when they want to offer Jewish content, they have to offer some of everything. So on the summer program I went to, it was called the International Leadership Kala. Later found out that was roughly based on the concept of the Yarchei Kala in the Gemara, the month of learning that the great rabbis would go to do. And it was a month-long program with a lot of Jewish content, Jewish studies programming. And at the program, because they represented all walks of Jewish life, there was like a rabbi for everyone. There was a Reform rabbi, a Reconstructionist rabbi, and of course they had to have an Orthodox rabbi. And at this program, I was very inspired by the Orthodox rabbi. It was the first time my eyes had really been open to traditional Judaism. It was the first time I ever really interacted with an Orthodox Jew. That rabbi's name was Rav Shai Klimnik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He passed away recently, and he really got me my start. He really inspired me to look more deeply into my Yiddishkeit, into my Judaism. When I got back to Atlanta, I had a very close friend, Robin Warben, who had a brother who had flipped out and become really religious. And he went to yeshiva and he wore a yarmulke and this really, really, really crazy religious guy. And I told her that I was inspired to kind of grow my Judaism and what do I do now? And she said, oh, well, my brother goes to this little synagogue right here in our neighborhood called Congregation Ariel. Why don't you check it out? Fine. So I went on a Shabbos morning. It was a tiny little congregation. It was in this little house, like a third of the size of the house I live in right now. And they barely got a minyan. I think I was the 10th man that Shabbos morning. Not a lot going on, but something really resonated with me when I was there. There was my friend's brother was there, Yosef Warben, and some of his friends from yeshiva were visiting, but the shul didn't have a rabbi yet. But somehow something clicked with me. I felt a little bit at home. I felt like this might be the place for me, and I started hanging out there. Lo and behold, to me at that point, was that the congregation had just hired a rabbi, and he was starting the following week. So I ended up there in the congregation 1 week before the rabbi started. That rabbi was none other than our guest tonight, Rabbi Binyomin Friedman. And so I really preceded him in his congregation by 1 week. And I started really hanging out at that shul, hanging out with Rabbi Friedman, hanging out at his family. Really, I have to be honest, in the beginning, it was just because I fell in love with Cholent. And I really, I knew if I went Shabbos morning and sat through davening, which I didn't understand so much about in those days, that I could get a really good Shabbos lunch afterwards. And Rabbi Friedman really welcomed me into his house in all ways possible. His kids became like my siblings. He and his wife became like second parents to me. And really from that point on, from the point of 16 until I went on to yeshiva when I was 19, they really raised me and taught me what it meant to be a Yid, what it meant to be a Jew. And there are many funny stories along the way, because as I described, the congregation was quite a fledgling congregation in those days, really trying to get off the ground. And beyond Shabbos morning, they tried to have a Wednesday morning minyan. And the way that it worked is there was a man, Terry Tenenbaum, he should live and be well. He would make phone calls to everyone involved with the congregation to hopefully make the minyan for Wednesday morning at 6:40 or 6:45 or whatever it was. And to me as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, that was really early, even though now I'm an early riser, but in those days it was really early. And I told Mr. Tenenbaum that I would be happy to help with the minyan, but in those days I took the bus to school. I didn't have my own car. So I said, you have to get me to school afterwards. And my school was not the neighborhood school. I went to a magnet school for performing arts that was a good 20, 25 minutes away from our neighborhood. But sure enough, I would go to make the minyan, and Mr. Tenenbaum would drive me to school afterwards. He always described how I looked in those days. I would wear, grungy type Seattle clothing, real baggy corduroys and flannel shirts, and I had long curly hair, and I would wear this little yarmulke right on top, and I walked into my public school, my magnet school, after he dropped me off after minyan. But it was really in those days, those were my formative years, as they would say. And it was really Rabbi Friedman, our guest for tonight, who kind of put me on the path. He sent me off to yeshiva. He helped me choose my yeshivas. And he helped me find my shidduch when it was time to get married. He was the shadchan. He and his wife were the shadchanim with me and my wife. And like I said, they're really second parents to me. I'll share with you just one more story before we continue with our program. Just a few weeks ago, we had the Yontiv of Purim, the holiday Purim, and in my family, we will never forget the first Purim I ever had with the Friedman family. I was still in high school, and the Friedmans invited me over for the Purim Suda, and I'd never been to a Purim meal before. And you know, even though I was in high school, I wasn't much of a drinker, and I really didn't know much about how to hold my alcohol. But I got to the Purim meal, and it was a blast for me, such an experience. And sitting next to me was a rabbi, Rabbi Hiller, Moshe Hiller, part of the Atlanta Scholars Kollel, a colleague of Rabbi Friedman's. And he just throughout the night kept my glass full. And he kept standing up and saying throughout the night, I have to make an announcement. Pinchas Landis just made or Pierce Landis, as I went by in those days, Pierce Landis just made another siyum on this bottle of whatever it was. And apparently I drank a lot of alcohol that night, so much so that I eventually passed out on the front lawn. Now, my friend Shimshon Kaplan, who used to live here in Cleveland, some of you know him, he was actually supposed to drive me home afterwards. But his parents were smart enough to say, there is no way you can drop him off at his house like this. We're calling his parents. Now, my parents had never met the Friedmans at this point. This was my parents, Shalom Aleichem, first time ever meeting the Friedmans, was picking me up on Purim from their front lawn, completely passed out, completely Adul Yad Ben Ara Hamila Baruch Mordechai. And that was a story that at the time wasn't so funny, but we definitely laugh about it today. We always joke about it. Thank God later, the Friedmans and my parents met under more normal circumstances and became more friendly. But that was just a funny story from those formative years in high school when the Friedmans took me into their house and really gave me what I needed to get my start in Jewish learning, and eventually to send me off to yeshiva so I could become the person that I am today. Rabbi Friedman, we want to thank you for being with us here tonight. And first of all, everyone's good, the family's good, kids are good.
Baruch Hashem, and everyone is doing well. Baruch Hashem.
I look forward to tonight, some of Rabbi Friedman's words inspiring all of us. So from the bottom of my heart, Rebbe, thank you for being here with us. And let's dive right in.
I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I was studying in Ner Israel Yeshiva in Baltimore, Maryland, when a group of young men, families, got together and decided that they wanted to create something called a kollel, and we wanted to get out into the community and teach Torah. We felt there was a dearth of Torah knowledge in the world, and we wanted to try to answer the bell. So Atlanta, Georgia was the location that was chosen for a whole host of different reasons. We moved here in 1987, fall of 87, early 88, and I began teaching with the Atlanta Scholars Kollel. After some years, some of those classes that I was doing in a particular suburb in Atlanta called Dunwoody, they started to catch on and start to develop a following. An idea came up that perhaps a shul, creating a synagogue and creating a community, would be a viable next step to help these people grow in their Judaism. So in 1993, a community was established here and in Dunwoody, Georgia. I was living in a different neighborhood. A few years later, we moved here. During that period of time, right around those years, that's when young Mr. Landis walked through our doors. And when we saw him, we started studying Torah together. And we felt like, this is why we came here. And we have been here ever since. We have a community, beautiful synagogue, nice community. And that's what I do, is I teach Torah. I'm the rabbi of that community. And I also teach Torah with the Atlanta Scholars Kollel till this very day.
When Rabbi Friedman and the three other founding members of the Atlanta Scholars Kollel moved to Atlanta, that was not a thing. It was a very new idea and creative idea to go from a yeshiva and start a kollel, an outreach kollel. For those of us here in Cleveland, we might be very familiar with all the multitudes of kollels we have. The big Beechwood kollel where many people study, and the smaller kollels around the community. But when Rabbi Friedman, together with the other rabbis, Rabbi Deutsch, Rabbi Silverman, Rabbi Schwartz, when they went down to Atlanta in 1987, it was a very unheard of thing. It was a very unheard of thing to go to a place like Atlanta, Georgia, and do any kind of Jewish outreach. So Rabbi Friedman, beyond just telling the story about what he did, he is really one of the pioneers in Jewish outreach in America. He was really at the epicenter of the Jewish outreach movement in the post-Six Day War, in the 70s and the 80s, when it was just getting warmed up, as himself a teenager, a student, and then really dedicated himself when it really started to explode in America in the 80s. So, that's what in many ways inspired me to go into Jewish outreach and to work in Jewish education. So we are literally talking to one of the pioneers of Jewish outreach here in America. And the synagogue, it's not your average synagogue. And I think you see in more ways than one from the second you walk in how it is not average. And one of the ways you see, and there's many aspects for the way that it is above average and just different than your average synagogue, but not the least of which is that it is a synagogue that is a congregation that's literally built around Torah study. So much so that when you drive up to the building, the first thing you see is what's called the Kollel Dome, which is the study hall of the synagogue. Many synagogues, they make their main sanctuary the focus, they make their social hall the focus, they make their kitchen the focus, but not in Rabbi Friedman's synagogue. In Rabbi Friedman's synagogue, it is clear that Torah study is the focus. And that's one of the things that's been inspiring to me for these past 25 years or whatever it is, since I wandered into the Friedman's home and the Friedman synagogue. So the topic we are discussing tonight is the topic of faith. And I would say it is one of the hardest topics to define. And we always start off with defining the topic. So I'm going to throw it out to you to define the topic of faith, but I'll introduce how difficult it is to define it with a funny story. And this is a funny story that came out of a recent podcast episode that we did. Rabbi Friedman was a guest on our podcast, on the Rabbi's podcast, a number of months back. And we recently did an episode with Rabbi Gershenfeld, in which Rabbi Spiro, my co-host, told a story that our mutual Rabbi Bullman Zatzal, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, once threw out the question in the course that he was in, where he said, define the word emuna, which is the Hebrew word for faith, and tell the difference between emuna and bitachon. And he said, some guy raised his hand and said, emuna is where you believe, and bitachon is where you really believe. And to which Rabbi Bullman looked at him and said, I hope you know you just said nothing. So, but that just sort of introduces how difficult it is to define this topic. So, Rebbe, what is your definition of the word faith?
Well, as you said, it comes from the Hebrew word emunah. So we always have to look into the etymologies of words if you're going to, dig into it. In the family of emunah is, of course, the word amen, amen. Right? We all say that. When someone says something, you say, amen, amen, which means I believe that what you're saying is true. I assent. I agree with that. But there's another interesting word. There's a word called an omein. An omein is a nursemaid. An omeid is a woman who is nursing a child. As it says, Vahi omein es hadasa, he acted as her nursemaid, someone that cares for and nurtures a child. Now, that's a fascinating relationship. If a little baby, and a little baby is nursing. If you want to ask who's faithful, when a little baby is nursing, that is the picture of faith. Because that child knows all goodness, everything comes from me, comes from here, comes from this mother, and I am being held by this mother. I am nothing compared to her. But then I'm everything as I'm attached to her. So really, Amuna is really to become like a baby, literally like a baby who's nursing. That's Amuna. That means you have faith, trust, security. You just feel at one with your source.
That's a beautiful idea. We did a program a number of months ago called "You Might Be a Heretic If," which was just a creative way of saying the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim, the 13 Principles of Faith from Maimonides. And in that series, we quoted a definition, just to throw in another idea from Moshe Shapiro Zatzal, where he said that looking again at the etymology, you have the word umnus, which means a craft or an occupation or a vocation. And he makes the point that emunah is not something that, so to speak, just happens. Like we say, I believe, I have faith, and what is it? No, it's not something that just happens to us. It's something that we have to work towards. And you see that very much also in the word with the same root as unus, as a vocation. And therefore, I hope these ideas that we're sharing here will be something that will help everyone here to really inculcate this and make it part of their life. So, Rebbe, across your life, who would you say is the quintessential example of a person of faith? Now, this can be someone that you've met, someone you knew, someone you didn't know, someone who's just a personality or profile we know. It can be a lonely man of faith. It can be a lonely woman of faith. Who is your example of a quintessential person of faith, and why is that person that example?
You have the lonely man of faith. You can also have a friendly man of faith. A person has lots of faith and lots of friends too. They're not like mutually exclusive. So I'll tell you one that I knew very closely, intimately, and another that I never knew but have learned a lot about. So the one that I learned a lot about is a man who wrote a book. And what was the book called? Emunah and Bitachon. The book was called, the two titles that you just mentioned, those two very difficult words that were brought up in Rabbi Bullman's class, of faith and trust, and finding the line between them and defining them has always been a big challenge. But the Rabbi Abraham Isaiah Karelitz, who was a great rabbi who died in the 1950s in Israel, originally from Europe, immigrated to Israel in the 1930s, died in the 1950s. And he was a major leader in Israel in his time. And he wrote this book, and he explores all these ideas, very, very deep ideas of emunah. And he once said that he never experienced a moment of anxiety in his life, other than the question of, had he done the right thing? But he never experienced anxiety other than that, which means if the cab didn't come on time, or you didn't know how much, if he had enough money to pay for the groceries that month, or something else was happening around him, he never experienced anxiety about life. Only about himself, perhaps, had he lived up to his responsibility. But externally, he experienced no anxiety. The only way a person can achieve that is by having absolute emunah. Because absolute emunah means that those things that are beyond my control are beyond my control, but they're in God's control. So he's got it. So why should I be anxious? So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing, to be beyond anxiety. Now, I never met the Chazon Ish. That's what he's called, after the name of another one of his great works. But Rabbi Karelitz would, to me, be the quintessential man of emunah. Now, in my lifetime, I've met many people that had emunah, but I'd have to say that going back in time, the farther back we go, once upon a time, emunah was very widespread and very much a part of people. So I would say my grandparents, my father's parents, whom I grew up with and I knew very well, they were people of absolute emunah. Absolute emunah. They came from a different world. They came from Europe. They were born in the late 1800s. And their entire approach to life was one of absolute emunah. They had faith and trust in God. They were not trying to control the world. They're just trying to do what they had to do. And I believe that they went to bed every night calm and at peace, internally at peace, because of that emunah. That's a big factor. That's the big benefit that emunah brings to the world, which, of course, everyone is searching so desperately for nowadays.
That's beautiful. Along those lines, I was thinking about that our sages say the idea that that anger is paramount to avodah zarah, to idol worship, which sounds very funny. Like, I understand anger is not a good thing, but is it really idol worship?
So that's exactly it. You see, idol worship. When we are angry, why do people get angry? People get angry. They're frustrated. And why are they frustrated? Because they're out of control. Something is going on and it's not the way I want it to be happening. And if I could fix it and change it, I would. But when I can't, I get angry. So if my kid's acting up, I'll straighten them out. But if I can't straighten them out, then I just get angry at them. Hollering, screaming. Some people might start hitting, lashing out, and all that. When you can't control the things around you, you get angry. That's really the key here. The key of Emunah, it's so interesting. It starts with the feeling. You have to achieve the feeling of any understanding of I am not in control. And I can live with that. I am not in control. But what comes in next then is Emunah means, but there is something that is in control. And that's God, who's greater than all of us and greater than everything. So, when I give up trying to be in control, which is such a futile endeavor and only leads to me being angry and frustrated or anxious all the time, and I turn that over, to borrow from the 12 steps, which is, how do people find their way to sobriety? They turn it over. They say, listen, I'm out of control, but he's in control. And so then all of a sudden they're invested with this great feeling of calm. And when you have that feeling of calm, you can go about your business in life. Take care of what you can take care of. And don't get upset about the stuff you can't take care of. Or don't sweat the small stuff, all that thing.
So Reverend Friedman, what would you say to somebody who says, okay, faith, Emunah, sounds like a good Jewish thing to do, sounds like a good Jewish thing to have and to focus on. How do I work on it? How do I increase my Emunah? We live in this crazy world where, as you've said, we're made to believe we can be in control of everything through our smart devices and our smart home and this and that. But I want to work on my Emunah. I want to work on my faith. What would you suggest that I do?
Really, the first step, and you're so right. Why is everyone so upset about the climate? Everyone's worried about the climate. The whole planet is going to go down the tubes. Why? Because, we're the only ones that can save it. We are in charge. We are in control. So this over-expanded idea of being in control of everything is literally killing us, because it's telling us that we have to fix it. I have to fix it. Anyone that has realized, even in your own little life, you can't even control the people that are around you. Parents, spouses can't control each other. Parents can't control children. We are so out of control. The first thing to really focus on is to focus on my insignificance, how little and small I am. Now, that doesn't really mean you're going to end up like that, because in the end, you'll find out how really significant you are. But you have to start off with the insignificance. First, we have to make ourselves and understand ourselves as being insignificant. And then we will realize that we are a part of something very, very great, which means that we're very significant. But we can only find our significance by first surrendering ourselves to a greater power, to that higher power that is in control. When I do surrender myself to that, then I become very powerful. But so first it starts off with get a grip on yourself. Take stock, take analysis. How really powerful are you? How many things are beyond your control? Can you find anything that's really in your control? Except perhaps maybe you can control your anger. Maybe you can control what comes out of your mouth. Sometimes, try to stick to that diet and see how much control you have. And we have such little control. That's where it starts, is first understand that I am not in control. Give up control, and then you achieve something very much greater, which is you find out how really powerful you are to impact things well beyond your abilities. But first you have to stop and get that idea out of your head that you really can change things and fix everything and make it all work.
So that's an amazing idea. And, thinking back to people that I've experienced from the previous generation, both like your grandparents who came in the first wave of Jews immigrating from Europe, and like my wife's grandparents who came in the, unfortunately, both had their difficulties, but the latter wave of Jews immigrating to the United States after World War II. And I think about my wife's grandmother, who we called Safta, Zichron Levracha, who was such a woman of Emunah, and complete trust and belief in the Almighty. And I think it came from the fact, in many ways, that the people who survived the war and were able to rebuild, which many weren't, and we can't judge any of those people, but the ones who were able to rebuild, well, they were brought to that state of being nothing. For her, for one, she was, as a young lady, as a teenager, she had blonde hair, blue eyes. She was able to pass as non-Jew. And as a young, 12, 13, 14 years old, traveled from town to town pretending like she was not Jewish and begging for food and stealing and doing whatever it could to survive till she survived the war. You live like that for a couple of years, you realize you're nothing. And therefore, when you go to rebuild, you rebuild from that place of realizing I am not in control. I've lived my life for the past 3, 4, or 5 years, whatever it is, completely out of control. And now I see where the real control lies. So, for those of us who've been able to experience, either through our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our parents, people who lived through a different generation where I guess Emunah came more readily, it was more readily available, but in part because it was so much more clear by the just day-to-day life that they were not in control of their situation.
Classic example taken from the arts. Who is the classic Jew in modern times? The classic Jew is Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye, the milkman. So Tevye's got big problems. This daughter's going off here and that daughter's going off there. His world is being turned upside down. So what does he do? He's riding along on his wagon and he's talking to God. He talks to God about it because who else are you going to talk to? To him, it is obvious, even though the author, Shalom Aleichem, the author of the book, was a non-religious man, but he was capturing the essence of a simple Jew, because a simple Jew once upon a time didn't have any illusions that he could really control things. He knew that there's a God out there, so he spoke to God. When you realize the world's out of control, but we think we can control everything. As soon as we get a pandemic, we've got to get some type of vaccine. There's got to be a vaccine for it. You got the planet, we got to fix it. But anything's going to happen, we can somehow fix it. In earlier generations, they realized you have children, diseases come through, they die. It just happens. That's the way life is. Life is out of control. And because of that, I believe that there were calmer, sturdier, more stable people.
Yeah, and I guess one of the original examples of this trait would be none other than Aaron HaKohen, than Aaron in the Torah, that we see that he has the tragic event take place on what should have been his happiest day, or the happiest day for the Jewish people at that point, which was the culmination of the Exodus, which was the building of the Mishkan. And on that very day that it was inaugurated, his 2 sons pass away. And what is his response? V'yidomar Aaron. Aaron is quiet. To which our sages explain, the commentators explain, that he had that emunah. He had the emunah that he was not in control, even though this was terribly tragic. He had all the questions that you would have had and I would have had, but he still accepted, after everything he had been through at that point, the 10 plagues, the Exodus, the splitting of the sea, the golden calf, etc., Mount Sinai, the golden calf, everything. He realized who's really in control. He said, so in one sense, it's terribly tragic. It was a terrible loss for him. The same loss that any father would have who loses 2 sons at the time of a happy occasion. But on the flip side, V'yidamaron, it didn't shake his emunah, because he realized how not in control he was, and therefore, for sure, we are.
Good evening, a good moed. I just want to thank everybody for being here. First off, it is a true schos. It is a real privilege to have everybody here, which this really has absolutely nothing to do with me. This is all about Kavod Torah, about honoring the Torah that has been learned here. But I do want to really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for being here. The question I got in Cleveland, I actually was privileged to finish already in the summertime, and I told everybody that I'm waiting to make the Siyum in Atlanta. And some people were puzzled by that. But when I told everyone in Atlanta that I planned to make the Siyum in Atlanta, nobody was puzzled by that. Everybody understood exactly where I was coming from. First of all, we are privileged, Baruch Hashem, to have 4 generations of Landises here in the Sukkah tonight for the Siyum. My grandmother Zozai Gazund is here, who will be in about 10 days. 10 days next week, celebrating Kanana her 96th birthday, mit the Mayach, mit the Kayach, and so for that reason alone, we had to make it in Atlanta, because she told me even though she's totally physically able to travel, she said she won't travel anymore, so we had to bring the Siyum to her. So Nona, thank you so much for being here, and my wonderful parents. Just the location of having my family and friends together is one answer. But in truth, there's a tremendous, as they would say in English, serendipity. But in Judaism, we don't have a concept of serendipity. We have a concept of siyata d'shmaya. We have a concept of hashgacha, that the divine hand guiding the world. That Chol Hamoed Sukkot seemed like the absolute opportune time to make the Siyum, because it was exactly 25 years ago this Shabbos that I wandered in the congregation Ariel for the first time as a 11th grader in high school. Few people from 25 years ago today are still here today to celebrate. So that in and of itself is an absolute tremendous thing. And just the idea of getting back to celebrate in the same place where you started, because it was literally not in this building, but on Sandell Drive where I started learning Gemara, and that's where it began 25 years ago. And then it was a process, Baruch Hashem went to yeshiva, parents sent me off to yeshiva, are completely supportive of going to yeshiva and learning and growing. But many people learn and not many people finish Shas. The question is, how do you get to finish Shas? So for me, Baruch Hashem, through the lessons my parents gave me, through the lessons my Rebbeim gave me, I was able to understand and appreciate what consistency means. And what this is all about tonight. Again, I did nothing but got up every day and learned Torah.
I want to mention one particular part of learning that I really treasure. And that is some learning that we did together. The particular learning that I treasure the most was when Pinchas was the Grand Aleph Gadol. And that was a big year for him as the Grand Aleph Gadol. The job of the Grand Aleph Gadol is to tour all around the country to all of the different B'nai B'rith lodges. And I felt very confident that after that year, and the learning that we did during that year, that to be able to, Pinchas was going to be able to be Kovei Itim. He would be learning Torah on a regular basis. Anything that would come up after that, I knew and was confident that he would keep on, and here we are to see a Siyum HaShas, which is the realization, the actualization of all of that. It's really been our pleasure and our honor to be, witnesses, to stand and to watch and to just stand in awe and to see that if you have an idea and you just go try to do some good, look what the Rebbeinu Shalom does. When we came out here, there was not the faintest idea that Pierce Landis would walk in the door. Who knows? But the main thing is, you just do. You just do. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'll take care of what's going to come out of it. Your job is just to go do something. You can't figure out what's going to come. You can't figure out what the results are going to be because you don't know my plan. But your job is just to do. And then I'll take it from there and I'll do all kinds of wonderful things and I'll bring you the right people and those people will take will take what you're doing and they'll make something of it and they'll grow. And all of it's like, just fantastically beyond our belief that what we could ever even have imagined. But all we know is that we're just supposed to do. And then things will come of it. And this event and this Siyum is evidence of that. And we're just absolutely brimming with pride from the bottom of our hearts on behalf of Dina and myself. I want to really thank you for coming here, coming back home to make this Siyum and being able to be here with your family and be here really where it all began. The next Siyum, hopefully, if it's not here, it'll be in Yerushalayim. Those are your two options. I'm giving you right now. Those are your two options. Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
So Rabbi Friedman, if you were given a billboard on 285, by the way, those of you who aren't familiar with Atlanta, that's the perimeter, or the Beltway, whatever you call it. That's the highway that goes around the city of Atlanta, at least at one point as it stood. Now it's gone well beyond the perimeter, but it's the big highway in Atlanta. So we talk about Atlanta congestion, you're talking about 285. So if you could take out a big billboard on 285 that had a message of Emunah for the world, what would you put on that billboard?
It's tough because, you don't want to be restricted to a billboard, but I tell you the truth, I would put on the following quote.
Rabbi Friedman, before we wrap up, any parting thoughts either on what we've discussed here tonight or even totally random thoughts we'll take? Any parting thoughts before we sign off?
Our generation, you and I, anyone that's watching this, we should be the greatest believers in all of history. This generation, the amazing thing is we're the littlest. Our belief is the most paltry of any generation ever existed, I'm convinced. But we should be the greatest believers. If you read the Torah, I don't know how many times God promises to the forefathers and then to the nation Israel itself that he's going to give them this land. Then he says in Deuteronomy, around chapter 30 or so, he says, and if you sin, I'm going to exile you from this land. And then he says, but in the end, I'm going to bring you back to this land. And lo and behold, he gave him the land. How do you like that? Just like it said in the book. Lo and behold, he kicked him out of the land. How do you like that? Just like it said in the book. For 2,000, that's a long number in human time, 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, we have been wandering around the world, and at this point, we are now coming back to that land that is unparalleled in the annals of mankind. Not even close. There is nothing that comes close to it. At this point, if you do look at the demographics, probably just about 50% of the Jews in the world live in Israel. Now, that's unparalleled. My grandfather was born in a world where he had not a shred of belief to go on. This is all promises. Pictures on the wall of the land of Israel on the eastern wall of their house. They put up a little picture of Israel, but they had nothing to go on. And me, if it wasn't for COVID, I could right now get up, go down to the airport, pull out a piece of plastic, and in 18 hours be walking the streets of Israel. It is absolutely amazing that God, after all these years, he said he was going to bring us back, and we're going back. And I don't want to get into any theological discussions about what the state of Israel is and is it messianic or was it. Let's put all that aside. But one thing's for sure, this is he didn't take it. We didn't go back to Uganda, and no other nation has ever gone back. What in the world is going on? Something is happening. It should be enough to smack anyone upside their head and say, hey, something's going on here. I think the guy that claims he's in control is in control. He's making good on his promises. No one else has ever done anything close to that.
I have a feeling all of our regular students here that are listening, if they've ever paid attention, are probably smiling because, we'll ask the question to the crowd, how many times have you heard me say that idea? And now you know where I got it from, right? Now you know why it was so inculcated in me. I've quoted a million times, if I quoted it once, the idea that the Rambam said in the 12th century and Rav Yaakov Enden said in the 18th century and probably many others in between said the most miraculous thing in world history is the fact that we were still here, that we're still here following the Torah. And if the Rambam could say that in the 12th century and Rav Yaakov Enden could say it in the 18th century, all the more so we are saying it now in the 21st century, and the miracle has only gotten greater. It's amazing. And when you speak about the fact that the majority of the world Jewish population is now in the land of Israel, not only did Rebbe's Zaidi and my Zaidi not even have an inkling of imagination they would see that in their times, But we are the first Jews since the destruction of the first temple to see that, right? They never got there with the second temple, right? They never got close to that, right? The majority of Jews stayed in Babylon as it switched names in different parts of different empires. But we're talking about that since the time of the exile, and not even the destruction of the first temple, the exile of the 10 tribes, which was 150 years before that. So you're talking, circa the year 570 before the Common Era, the time of the exile of the 10 tribes. That was the last time the majority of the world Jewish population was in the land of Israel. So we're 2,500 years past that. And no Jew has even come close in 2,500 years. And here we are. And again, if you need your faith and what we are doing, and that this is, that we're on the right track here, just, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the numbers and the history.
All I can say is that, I was just, I don't know if you have them in your neighborhood, but I drive around up and down the streets, and people like to put a lot of signs, a lot of yard signs out, with proclamations of all kinds of beliefs and stuff like that, So there's there's one like, in this house, we believe in science. And I really do believe science, it's a system, it seems to work to the extent to which it works, except when it doesn't work. But I think that really is part of, is probably a big part of what has brought us to the state that we are now. Because once the scientific revolution started happening, people started to feel that they really could control this. If we could it's here, we can figure it out, and then we can take control of it. We can be in control. And that is really what we have to try to turn loose of. Yes, we use our system and we try our best, but people who really understand that there's something greater than that if you want to get into quantum physics or whatever, you'll see that it doesn't always work out that way. Then what do? So we have to realize that we can't control, and I think science has a tendency to seduce us into this belief, and it's really hurting us, because the more and more we believe we can control, the more and more people are really unhappy, and they're at ease, ill at ease. And we're in a world right now that is so ill at ease, and everyone is trying to get this situation under control. So the United States of America is it's not pandemic, it's pandemonium. And this is where we need to have the ultimate faith to realize, if God got us from all the way back there, and he's taken us all the way back to Israel, all this is going to work out. This is all part of a plan, because everything is part of a plan. Everything is part of the plan. It's all going to work out. Keep your head level, go about your business, do what you can do, but don't get so bent out of shape as it seems as though everybody in every which direction is right now.
Right. Well, beautiful. I remember an idea you shared with me, again, probably 20 something years ago when I was still in high school. And I forget which major university it was, but there was a major university where they took a survey as to people's belief in the infinite, belief in the Almighty, or lack thereof. And there was an overwhelming disproportionate response from the humanities department and an overwhelming disproportionate response from the science department. The humanities disproportionately did not believe in an Almighty, did not believe in an all-powerful being in the world, did not believe in God. Whereas the science department overwhelmingly believed in God. And it didn't make sense that why is it the humanities don't believe in God and the scientists do believe in God? Maybe it should be the other way around. So when the humanities department was asked and surveyed on their responses to why they did not believe in the idea of a creator, of an almighty creator, they said, it's because of science. Because we know from science there's no almighty creator. When the scientists in the science department were surveyed as to why they overwhelmingly did believe in a almighty creator, they said, look, we can tell you the what of the world. We can tell you that if you take 2 glasses of H and 1 glass of O and you mix it together, you'll get some water. We can tell you that if you pick something up and drop it, it will fall. We can tell you all of the what's of the world. But no one's ever been able to figure out why. We still don't know why. We still don't know why everything works like this. Why is it so perfect? Why is it so exact? The quote that I always like is from Scientific America. I forget the name of it was a very famous writer for Scientific America who wrote that the chances of the world coming into existence by pure chance are the same as a hurricane sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a 747 aircraft. Right? It's the same probability. So the scientists said, we haven't answered that yet. And until we answer that, our best answer is an almighty God. So, and that's something I heard first from you 20-something years ago, and it's stuck with me until this day.
Really, you can have your claims, you say, I didn't like this or that he did, but by and large, he's got us till this point, and he seems to be on track based on everything I'm observing.
Beautiful stuff. And as Rabbi Friedman, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us tonight. And Rabbi Friedman, if people want to check out any of your digital classes or your online Zoom offerings, where can they find you online?
They can find me online at atlantakollel.org. And they can also go to kangariel.org. I'm on both of those places.
So if you want more Rabbi Friedman, that's where you can find it. And Rebbe, I just want to thank you for your time. And I know I was inspired, and I'm sure that all of our viewers and listeners were as well. So thank you so much.
And thank you for inspiring me. This is the Nachas Hour. I get to spend time with you and looking at all you're accomplishing. Nachas, that's it. All there is to it.
Thank you so much. Good evening to all of you. First off, thank you everybody for participating with us here tonight. Thank you for tuning in for this wonderful discussion with my mentor, Rabbi Binyomin Friedman. And before I delve into some thoughts I had, just some afterthoughts, so to speak, I want to open up to the crowd and see if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, just about anything that was said, anything that was unclear. I in many ways feel that this is a very heavy session, that we really covered a lot in a little bit of time, and some very deep ideas. So before I try and pick on some people, embarrass some people, whatever, I wanted to see if there's any questions from the crowd. So feel free to either unmute yourself or put in the chat box if you have any specific questions.
I have a question. This is Dina.
Hey, Dina, how you doing?
Baruch Hashem, how are you?
Good, Baruch Hashem.
Good. So my question is like this. If you're saying that everything is in Hashem's hands, and so you shouldn't be upset about things, but could you say that on the same hand, then you shouldn't be happy about things either? Because it's not that you are doing anything or accomplishing anything. Things just happen the way that Hashem wants it to happen. So it kind of is telling you, is it like that you're supposed to take your emotion out?
I'm very glad you asked that, because I want to clarify the point that Rabbi Friedman was speaking of. And I do not believe that Rabbi Friedman ever said, don't be upset. He said, don't be anxious. I believe the term used was anxiety. And the quote that he gave from the Chazon Ish from Rav Yeshaya Karlitz was that he never had anxiety in his life. Now, that didn't mean they didn't get upset about things. It didn't mean they wasn't happy about things. But it meant that it wasn't met with a certain amount of anxiety. And that's why, I think one of the places we see this most specific is when we look at the Jewish customs of mourning. It's interesting how we are a people that has regimented mourning. We also have regimented happiness to a certain extent, right? We have the holiday of Sukkot, which is called Zman Simchasenu. So we have regimented emotion. How do you regiment emotion? You ever stop to think about that? How in the world does a person regiment their emotion? Now I'm going to be happy. Now I'm going to be sad. Now I'm going to mourn. Now I'm not going to mourn. How do you regiment? It's emotions. We're not in control of our emotions. Our emotions are free flowing. Well, I believe that the lesson is no, we're very much in control of our emotions. That does not mean that we should not be upset when difficult situations happen, and that does not mean we shouldn't be happy when great things happen. But we should. But the idea is that it's the anxiety that often comes along with it for many of us. That's where the concept of emunah, of faith, comes into play. We quoted the idea about how Kaas, a person who gets angry, and by anger I mean like really angry and takes out their anger, that's like a person who is worshiping idols, because if you're going to take it to that extent, you're saying, okay, there's not a plan here, right? There's not a plan here. Now that plan might play out to be complicated for us sometimes. The plan sometimes comes out to be great for us. And this is really the whole lesson of Purim, which we just had. That when we talk about, going back to the story we started with tonight, when we talk about the idea of on Purim, we're supposed to get so intoxicated that we can't tell the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. What does that mean? Now, as I told the story, I've gotten intoxicated on a few Purims in my life, and I can tell you this much. There's a fine line between being able to recognize who people are and completely passing out, right? I don't know people's experience with drinking, and this is not an AA meeting or for us to talk about different experiences with drinking, but from my experience, that as long as I'm awake, I can tell who's who, right? And not being able to tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai. I mean, that's like Haman was. I mean, imagine every great every anti-Semite of world history, right? Hitler, Stalin, Nebuchadnezzar, Nimrod, Titus. Take your pick of all the great anti-Semites of world history, and that's who Haman was. And on the flip side, you have Mordechai, who's the chief rabbi. So imagine like the most saintly person in the world compared to the most evil person in the world. And like, I have to get so intoxicated that I confuse them. That's like saying, okay, I want you to get so intoxicated you can't tell the difference between Osama bin Laden and Mother Teresa. Okay, it's not possible. Because either you're drinking or you pass out, right? You get sick. So what does it mean we're supposed to get we're supposed to get to the point where we don't know the difference between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman? The answer is it's philosophical. It means the character, meaning the drive behind each of them. That what Haman was trying to perpetrate in the world, there was nothing more terrible than that. Mass genocide, right? Trying to perpetrate mass genocide for the Jewish people. Well, who is Mordechai? He's the chief rabbi, right? He's trying to get the Jewish people to follow the Torah and listen to the Torah. And there, at least on the surface, it seems that there couldn't be more distinct paths in life. Yet, how does each one play out? One gets tremendous punishment for his attempted genocide of the Jewish people, and one gets tremendous reward for trying to save the Jewish people. So we have to come to the realization that is all the activity of the Almighty. That is all the Almighty's manipulating the world. Now, we don't feel it, right? We don't feel like there's strings attached. We feel like we live in a world where there's no strings attached. But we see from the Purim stories, everything seemed like just the normal events, the normal flow of politics and political and socioeconomic pressures and whatnot that led to this whole story coming about. Yet somehow in the end, the tzaddik's on top, right? The righteous is on top and the evil's on bottom, even though the beginning of the story was the exact opposite. And we have to come to the realization that is all from the Almighty. So when those bad things happen, be upset. When God forbid someone dies, we sit Shiva, we have Shloshim, we have the year of mourning, we say Kaddish, we mourn for them. But to lose ourselves over it is to say, there's no plan here. This is random. Some terrible random thing happened to me. No, something difficult happened to me, but it's somewhere in the plan that the Almighty has for this world. So I hope that clarified. I hope that didn't just make you more confused.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else have a thought, a question, comment, concern, good joke, bad joke? Okay. So it's interesting. I want to share with you one great story. Maybe we'll end with this if there's no more questions. Thank you, Dan. So there. One of my teachers from Yeshiva, we actually had him speak 2 years ago. The Partners in Torah annual fundraiser was Rabbi Yisachar Frand, and Rabbi Frand told a story about it was during his children's Shavuot Brachos, the week following the wedding of his children, and his mother-in-law at the time was in a wheelchair. Was already an older lady, was not able to walk on her, was in a wheelchair, and he said one of his greatest merits was being able to wheel his mother-in-law around to take care of his mother-in-law. And he told a story about how they walked out of he wheeled her out of the house once, and she says to him, Yisachar, I'm sorry, please don't be upset at me. Can we please go back to the house? I forgot to kiss the mezuzah on the way out of the house. Now, this is a lady that, in her time, she was a European immigrant, no day schools, no education, like whatever she had, she picked up from her parents' house. She for sure doesn't even know where the concept of kissing a mezuzah upon entering or exiting a room comes from. Yet it was something she took very seriously. And that's because she had that deep set emunah, that deep set faith, that belief, that belief in the Almighty has a plan in the world that she didn't need to be taught it. She didn't need to go to schools. There was a time period where Jews, this was in our mother's milk. I think it is still in our mother's milk, but just there's a lot of distractions that distract us from it. And I think that is why it's the foundation. It's Rabbi Sachs isn't here for us to ask questions to as to why he ordered these 10 steps like he did. But I think if I was making the order, right, it was 10 steps only with Rabbi Landis, that the faith might be the base, right? Because I think that it to a certain extent all starts with faith. I want to say one last idea before I wrap up, because it's something we touched on at the beginning of the conversation, but I don't think we explained fully. And that is that there is a confusion in Jewish philosophy between two concepts, two Hebrew words. One being the word we're discussing tonight, emunah, which is often translated as faith, and the other one being bitachon, which people translate as trust. Right. So that was the beginning of the class, where I told the story from Bullman about where Bullman said, what's the difference between emunah and bitachon? The person said, emunah is to believe and bitachon is to really believe. Right. And these are, similar to in the past two sessions, we had a difficulty explaining where tzedakah ended and where chesed began. In other words, where charity ends and kindness begins. Well, I think we have the same thing where does faith and trust begin? Because I think to a certain extent they are very much wrapped up together. And a person who has true emunah, true belief, and when we talk about belief, we talk about going back to, if you weren't in the session with us, the session on You Might Be a Heretic If, which was based on Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. That's the basis of Jewish faith. And you start with a basis like that, then you come to the realization that things might be difficult, things might be challenging, things might be great today and not so great tomorrow. But in the end, I come to that realization that it's all part of a plan. And every now and then we get that sneak peek into the plan. I don't remember the last time I've quoted this, but I think it's worthwhile to quote it. So if you've heard it from me before, I apologize. You can just shut off the Zoom now. But there's, in this past week's Parsha, this past week's Parsha was Kisisa. It was the story of the Chet Egel, the story of the golden calf. And there's a really strange occurrence that in the process of Moses asking the Almighty for forgiveness on behalf of the Jewish people, he asked the Almighty to show his face, that the Almighty should show his face to Moshe. That's the request that Moshe makes of the Almighty. And, it's kind of a strange juxtaposition as to why exactly is Moshe asking for this now. And what's even more peculiar is the response that the Almighty gives to Moshe. Because he says after, let me get the exact verse here. He says, right? So Moshe, says, V'yomer Hashem al Moshe, Agam Zedavar Asher Dibarta Ese Kimata Chen Be'ene Basically, that God says to Moshe, don't worry, I'm going to take your word and we're going to forgive the Jewish people. And Moshe responds to that, V'yomer Hareni na es kvodecha. Hashem, please show me your honor. To which the Almighty responds, V'yomer Ani ever kol tuvi al panecha, v'karasi b'shem Hashem lefanecha. He says that I will put all my goodness before you, and I will call the name of God before you. And I will have mercy. But you can't see my face.
Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai, because a human being cannot see my face and live. So therefore, we're going to go up here on this mountain. I'm going to just put you in the cleft of the rock. The high above kivodi v'sam ticha b'nikras atzor v'shakosi panecha kapayala ad avarti. So I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock. And after I pass by, then you can take a peek at my back. And you will be able to see my back, but you cannot see my face. This is probably one of the strangest 4 or 5 verses in the entire Torah. Okay? Moshe is praying for forgiveness for the Jewish people. God grants it, and Moshe sees that it's what we call an ace ratzon, a time of a time of closeness, and he wants to take advantage of it. And he says, God, while we're here, show me the beef, right? Show me your face. Pull back the curtain. Show me what it's all about. To which the Almighty responds to Moshe and says, well, no one can see that and live. Therefore, I'm going to put you in the cleft to the rock. I'm going to pass by, and you can't see my face, but you can see my back. Okay? Like, what in the world is going on over here? So our sages tell us that Moshe was bothered by the age-old question of Tzadik V'Ralav Rasha V'Tovlo, the question of why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? Famous question, complicated question, hard question to understand, hard question to answer. That was a question that Moshe was asking to the Almighty. That was a big question mark. That was the one thing that Moshe didn't understand. So when he says, Hareini na kivodecha, show me your honor, what he's saying is to help me understand this conundrum. How can you have a world where bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? And what's the Almighty's response? He says, no one can see that. No one can see my face and live. Meaning what? He said, Moshe, you're looking at it all wrong. You want to understand my dealings with the world. You want to understand my plan. You want to understand why this happened, why that happened, why the other thing happened. You want to understand how this happened. You're looking at it all wrong. You cannot look at it head on and hope to understand it, right? You can't. That's not how it is. You can't look at things from the beginning of a story and hope to get the whole story. It doesn't work like that. The only way that you can fully understand a story is to look at it from the end. Look at it after it's played out. So why do you have this question as to why bad things happen to good people? Very simple, because you're looking at it either head on or you're looking at it in the middle of the story at Act 3. Well, the story has 12 acts. It hasn't played out yet. Look at it afterwards, and then you'll understand it. And that was represented by the Almighty passing by Moshe, and Moshe could only see his back. In other words, see the whole story. Now, our sages add one more piece to this. They say that what did Moshe, so to speak, see on Hashem's back? He saw the knot of his tefillin, right? The Talmud in Brachos says that God, in fact, wears tefillin. That's an anthropomorphic idea that I don't fully understand. When we get to a series on Kabbalah, maybe we'll get a little bit more into that. But it says that the Almighty wears tefillin. It said that Moshe saw the knot of his tefillin. Now, what are tefillin, right? Imagine someone wearing tefillin. And imagine you never saw someone in tefillin before, right? Because it looks strange. What do you see? You see a person and this big black box right here that looks like I don't know, some kind of casino game piece or something like that. A big black box right here, and these 2 black straps on either side of his neck. So you might say, oh, that dude is wearing a really funny hat and even stranger scarf, because that's what it looks like if you've never seen it before. But if you see the person from the back, what do you see? You see, oh, now I get it. That funky looking black box, well, that has a strap going through that. And that strap is tying into a knot. And that knot is coming down on 2 sides on either side of him as the 2 straps in the front. It's all tied together. I thought this was 3 random things, a funky hat and a funky scarf. But now I see it's all tied together. So that's the lesson the Almighty was saying to Moshe. After things pass, with the hindsight of time, that's when things can make sense. That's when everything is all tied together. That's when everything comes together. Or say just say elsewhere that this world is referred to as the world of questions, but the next world, so to speak, when we take leave of this world, it's the world of answers. In other words, there's no questions in the next world, because when we get to the point where we're not bound by time, we're not bound by space, and we're able to, so to speak, take a picture of the world, a snapshot, have the purview of the world, past, present, future, here and there, all being the same, which is how it exists in the non-physical world, in the spiritual world, in the world of the souls, then it all makes sense. Then there's only answers. This world, we only have questions. Okay. Any last questions, comments, concerns, good jokes, bad jokes, anything before we wrap it up tonight? Okay, well, I want to thank you all. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel, 8 p.m. on Zoom, Facebook Live, YouTube, Torah Anytime, wherever you choose to watch it. And we will be talking about Israel with Rabbi Mordechai Becher. Rabbi Mordechai Becher is a professor at Yeshiva University in New York and is also a doctoral candidate in medieval Jewish history at Yeshiva University. So he is absolutely fascinating. Beyond being fascinating, he is hilarious and entertaining, and we'll look forward to that next week. In the meantime, if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out to me either on a social media channel, email, text, WhatsApp, whatever works for you. And I would like to wish you all a wonderful evening and a wonderful week.